Welcome to a very special program of Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we are going to do something we've never been able to do before. We're going to interview an editor and author. You remember last week our guest was Mary McGarry Morris, who's written a book called The Lost Mother. And with us in the studio today is Kathryn Court, who is the editor of this book and has been working trying to make Mary McGarry Morris a good writer for 18 years. Thank you for joining us, Kathryn.
It's a pleasure.
You are, I have to identify you for our listeners, in addition to being an editor, which I think is the most important thing in the world, she's also president of Penguin Books and publishers of Plume, a line of high-level paperbacks that I've had something to do with in my past. Now, obviously, right now you're on what I would call a different assignment for an editor. You're traveling with one of your authors. Is this because Mary McGarry Morris has gotten in trouble on the road before?
No, not at all, no.
No, are you sure, Mary? Are you sure?
Kathryn hasn't had to bail me out.
No, that's good. Is this something you do frequently, or?
No, I hardly ever do it. I've occasionally gone on the road to a city or two with an author, but I've never gone to a few cities in a row in the way we're doing this week. But I really wanted to do this to partly experience what it was like to be on the road, because I know authors, it's a demanding and difficult thing to do.
Yes.
And I also wanted to spend some time with Mary Joan, who I don't see that often.
Aha!
And I wanted to meet some of those great booksellers and talk to them about what was going on in their business.
Good. The first reason for your being on the tour, I think, is very, very important, because sitting here in San Francisco, we frequently, or most often, I could say, get authors at the end of the tour. And they are so tired of going from city to city, of eating club sandwiches in their room, that they could scream. And if nothing else, that kind of rapid movement, that in a city, out of a city, like somebody says, "Oh my gosh, you're going to San Francisco, isn't that wonderful?" And the answer is no, it's not wonderful. I'm not going to see a damn thing. So I'm glad you're experiencing it. How have things gone with the booksellers for both of you? Mary, what about you?
It's been a wonderful experience meeting them, and it's so important to get their sense of what they think of the book and how they'll promote the book to their readers. Mm-hmm. It's been important.
And you've been doing readings and that kind of thing?
Yes.
And signing.
Readings and signings and meeting salespeople. And
great.
It's been a good
experience. Have you learned anything you didn't know before?
Have I learned anything I didn't know before? No, I've done it before,
yeah.
and so I wasn't surprised at what you said, club sandwiches, and although we've eaten pretty well, very well.
We've had a few nice
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, we haven't.
Kathryn, any surprises for you?
Not really. I mean, I think that one of the things I've really learned that I don't think I would have learned if I hadn't come along on this tour is really to try and learn how to distinguish our books more and more from the very many books that are being published. I think that's one of the main reasons for doing a tour like this.
Yeah.
So that this book is the one that people think about and remember, and as Mary Joan just said, hopefully ask their customers to buy.
I think that's a wonderful lesson to learn and to always remember, because there's no doubt in my mind, I escort authors as well as do this program, that when an author goes into a bookstore, if he or she only signs copies and says hello to the staff or somebody on the staff, the next customer who walks in and says, I'm just interested in a novel. Did anything come in recently that, boom, and this book is liable to come right into the mind of the bookseller because of that stop.
Yeah.
Not that a lot of time was spent or a lot of effort given. So I think that's a good lesson. In general, what is the relationship between editor and author? if one can talk about there being such a thing.
Well, there definitely is a relationship, I think, between every author and editor. It's a different relationship, depending on the nature of the book, depending how skilled the author is. So it varies a great deal from author to author.
Depending how skilled. So the author is not so skilled, you've got a longer, more intense relationship.
More demanding, definitely, for both people, I think.
In terms of directing and perhaps rewriting, reworking, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Is this woman sitting next to you, does she put you through all that kind of stuff?
Well, no, because with very few exceptions, her books have arrived on my desk in wonderful shape.
Ooh. So when we come back, we're going to zero in on this relationship between Mary McGarry Morris and Kathryn Court and how they work together to bring us a wonderful book called The Lost Mother.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. I'm Jim Foster, and this is a very special program of Conversations on the Coast because with us we have Kathryn Court, editor, president, Penguin Books, and publisher of Plume. We have our author here, Mary McGarry Morris, who wrote a wonderful book called The Lost Mother, and we're going to dig into their relationship and get a little bit behind the scenes of book publishing. Toward the end of the last segment, Kathryn, you said that in the case of Mary McGarry Morris's book, The Lost Mother, it kind of came to you or came to your desk, and it was rather complete. Is that what you said?
That's exactly what I said.
Okay, well, then I have to ask Mary McGarry Morris, what did you bring her, and how did you get there? I mean, where did the idea come from, and how did you develop it?
The idea came from an incident in my own family's history. My grandmother had walked away from her family, leaving my mother and her brother and sister alone during the Depression to be raised by their father, who was scrambling for work all the time. The story, I was working on another novel, and the story, the words, the voice of Thomas came to me as I sat down one morning to work on what I thought was going to be my sixth novel, and I just recognized it was an exhilarating moment, and I went with it. I stayed with Thomas. I stayed with The Lost Mother, and when I got to the end, I knew I had a pretty good book.
I love that story because I think Thomas is so powerful as the voice, as the quote narrator unquote, and he's much more than a narrator. He's a wonderful, wonderful character. I love him.
He stayed with me.
So you had that, and he kind of grabbed you as
he did.
It were.
He did, and that went quickly, that novel. I
did
wrote
it?
that very quickly compared to my others. Kathryn was quite surprised when it came.
So there were not a lot of steps then, Kathryn, from what she brought in or what she submitted to finish book?
No, there weren't a lot of steps in terms of the manuscript itself. There were a few small queries. I mean, in a way, almost copy editing queries.
Okay.
That Mary Joan took care of. And my role, in a way, was more as the sort of editor-publisher, making sure that the book had the right jacket, that we wrote the right copy to describe it, both in catalogues and on the book jacket itself, and to make sure that the book was positioned in a way that did it justice. So that was a lot of the role with this particular book.
You forced me to ask a question I wanted to hold till later. Everybody wants to know, how do you decide what goes on the jacket? Because, well, I don't have to tell you how important that is. And this pose, the jacket, which is Margaret on a bed, and I know where it comes in the novel. But for a long time, as I read it, I wondered, what's the justification of that? She's never had a bed that good.
Well, I think that because obviously this book is about the Depression, we started looking, the art director and I started looking for photographs taken during the Depression. And we came across this absolutely marvelous Dorothea Lange photograph that seemed quite perfect. And Mary Joan, like many authors, is very concerned that it's the right jacket, and we sent 3, I think. Is that right, Mary Joan? We sent you 3 different choices.
Yes.
And Mary Joan and I both loved the same one the most. So that was lucky.
Kidding.
That was lucky. We didn't argue.
No, Kathryn said, you choose the one you like best. You tell me. I said, well, you tell me which one you like best.
Yeah.
And as
You
it
go
turned
first.
out, we both, this was the one.
Horribly polite, aren't we? Really ridiculous. We should have just said, this is it, Mary Joan. This is the one I like.
It's an amazing cover.
But the interesting thing is that you had an art director who was also happy.
Yes,
and
we have.
that's unusual. I mean, sometimes authors and editors will say this is great, and the art director will say, "My God, it won't produce in an ad," and so forth and so on. But that's great. That's wonderful. So there we have the story without too much rewriting, just queries as you call them, and the book is ready to go. And the question that I have, and I guess every author in the world has, is how does this book then have a life within Viking Penguin, which makes it stand out from other titles? Is that your job as editor?
That is my job.
Okay.
And it begins with a launch meeting and goes from there through a number of meetings.
Does she come in and talk about it at sales conferences, the author?
The author doesn't know. Kathryn does that.
Oh, you do that?
I do that.
Okay. So
I do that.
you go to the sales conference and you're the advocate. Is that a good word? For this title?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And then there's something called the response of the sales force at a sales conference, and then it gets positioned.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good word, position. I'm getting good at this
You know
stuff.
a lot about this.
Yeah. And then it's decided that you're going to run around the country with your friend Mary McGarry Morris, and it's wonderful. The Lost Mother is clearly a good or a great joint achievement. What about the future for editor and writer? We're going to find out when we come back.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. This is Conversations on the Coast on a very special day because we have with us the editor, Kathryn Court, also president of Penguin Books and publisher of Plume. The book that she edited recently for a woman that she's been working with for a long time, Mary McGarry Morris, is called The Lost Mother. And we've been talking about the present, and now I want to wiggle a little bit, if you don't mind, into the future. But before we get to the future, we ended the conversation in the last segment that you're at the sales conference, and you're, Kathryn, and you're advocating that the salesman really get behind The Lost Mother. Mm-hmm. And then the sales conference is over. Do you have to continue your advocacy role to make sure something happens? Like, hey, they were enthusiastic, but where's the advertising?
Right. Well, it is a continual thing. I mean, it goes on through the publication and beyond and then into the paperback. But really, the salespeople have read the manuscript before we get to sales conference.
Uh-huh.
And what you hope happens is that they're really enthusiastic and they talk about it too, not just me talking about it.
Good.
So that's great. But it goes on till through the paperback publication.
Did that happen in this case? Did they talk about it? Were they enthusiastic?
They loved the book. They loved the book.
Well, I like your salesman because I love the book too. I love it. Okay. Now, I'm looking at these titles of yours, Kathryn, president and all that kind of stuff, publisher. How do you find time to be an editor? Or did you just say, this is my first love?
Well, I like to have different sorts of work to do. And I wouldn't ever want to give up editing.
Good.
But I enjoy running a list and helping my colleagues. So I like the variety of it. And I do my editing at home anyway. And all editors edit at home, not at work. So it's possible.
Well, Mary, it's pretty obvious that Kathryn's going to be very busy. I mean, not just editing you, but running the company. What are you going to be doing? You going to take a vacation now?
I hope to get right back to my writing.
Aha.
Start it again. Let's pick up the novel I was working on and
the one that you interrupted
yes,
because
for the Lost
of Thomas.
Mother. Yes.
Yeah. What's that about? Can we talk about that, or are you superstitious about that?
It's not superstition so much as it leaves me feeling kind of vulnerable when I talk about it, as if I've exposed it to something that maybe the air might damage. So it's
because it's in an unfinished state.
Yes, and it may change a great deal. So it's probably better not to discuss it.
That's the best answer to that question I've ever had.
Oh,
I often wonder with authors what's going on next, and they're always very secretive about it. There's one author though who, when he goes out reading, reads something from his next book, and not his first book. But of course, he is a fantasy fiction writer, and what do you expect? Fantasy fiction is kind of like that. So, are there any big projects, Kathryn, that you're going back to? Or maybe you're not going back. You're going to go on to Hawaii from this?
Oh, I wish I were. Actually, no, I'm back to the office next Monday, and I've been working on a big book of history, a book about World War II, written by a man called John Glussman, a book called Conduct Under Fire, that is about his father's experiences as a POW in the Pacific, which is a marvelous book. And that's
his experiences as a POW?
His father's experiences as a POW in the Philippines and Japan during World War II.
I'd like to see that.
That's a very interesting book, and I've loved. I like history a lot.
Do you think the author will tour?
I hope he will be. He will be touring. Yes,
well, I hope there's enthusiasm, because I'd sure like to look at that book.
Okay, that'd be great.
Now, one of the things an author does, Mary, when he or she is out on tour, they go to bookstores, and they're supposed to get up and read for at least 20 minutes, usually. And since The Lost Mother is written so wonderfully, I wonder if you could kind of take us out by reading something from The Lost Mother, please.
Oh, thank you. They said it was bad for everyone, but nobody else the boy knew had to live in the woods. Even all these years later, with histories aligned, his own, the country's, his dreams can still erupt in this welter of buggy heat, the leaf-rustling prowl of dark creatures a canvas thinness away, and stars, millions of stars, so brilliant through the slant of the flap that with all the night sounds and sourceless shadows in wait, the stars crackle around them as if the tent is an enormous boiling cauldron. And yet they sleep, his father and sister on cots across the way. Everything they own is in this tent. Most important, the knives, cleavers, and saws. Without his slaughtering tools, his father says he has nothing. Supposedly the bad times came
The Lost Mother is full of writing as apt and powerful as what you're listening to.
But
it's been our privilege to talk to the two people who had the most to do with creating The Lost Mother. Author Mary McGarry Morris, editor Kathryn Court. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.